Welcome back to Lean RPA Principles and Practice. This is Chapter 2, A Brief History of Time by Rob King. In Chapter 1, we introduced the course and looked at the goals and outcomes that we expect to achieve. Here in Chapter 2, we're going to provide a background to both automation and Lean Six Sigma. And at the end of Chapter 2, we'll look back at the goals to see what we've achieved. Chapter 2 provides the foundations you need to understand automation, Lean Six Sigma, and also a little of the history that's led to where we are today. So, with no further ado, we'll start this chapter first looking at the topic of automation. During the Industrial Revolution, changes took place in how goods were produced. Instead of utilising artisans to produce handmade items, machines started to help and eventually take the place of those artisans. Machinery such as the spinning wheel to produce textiles, the water wheel to power machinery, and the steam engine were all invented. These inventions aided speeding up the production of manufactured items. However, with materials now being produced quicker and cheaper, the need for manufactured goods was greater than the supply. This material shortage forced factories to open up for greater production hours and placed hard demands on the men, women and children in the workplace. These demands became increasingly difficult to achieve and ultimately led to laws to protect those factory workers. However, these changes basically led to better businesses and achieved higher success. Interesting for us on the topic of RPA is how increased automation actually increased demand for some of those goods and services, and we'll see examples of this later on. Still on the topic of automation, but actually now starting to cross over with some of the principles of lean thinking, because lean thinking started at Toyota Car Company. But before they were a car company, Toyota began as a company that made automatic looms to weave fabric. Automatic looms actually had a problem at the time. Whenever a thread broke, the loom could make a large quantity of defective product very quickly. And in 1902, Sakichi Toyoda, founder of the Toyota Group, invented a loom that stopped any time a thread broke. As a result, quality defects significantly decreased and one operator was able to monitor several machines at a time. The principle of a machine that can stop autonomously when a defect occurs later became one of the key principles of lean thinking. In the 1930s, Toyota Automatic Loom Works received a large order and Sakichi Toyoda used the profits to start in the car industry. Starting work in the car industry in Japan was very difficult as resources were very limited, and therefore the focus on eliminating any wasteful activity from their processes and manufacturing became a core component of their ethos. And again, this became a key component of lean thinking, focusing on quality built in and focusing on eliminating waste. Two principles that we're going to look at whenever we look at any business process for automation. In many modern business scenarios, the customer has effectively taken on the role of quality control inspector in order to ensure their expectations have been met. This situation creates dissatisfied customers, and it always costs more than the direct costs of correcting the quality related issues at source. Indirect costs stemming from this practice can be enormous and are often overlooked. Such things as lost opportunities or insurance or employee morale, all are affected by lack of quality. Quality has to be built into the production during the entire process. Do it once, do it right, get it right first time. If quality inspectors were evaluating the cars as they came off the production line as incomplete, then it's too late. The defect has already occurred. But quality at source means correcting it before it gets further down the process. These are all principles that we put into practice when we look at processes for automation. We want to do the process right first time, every time, because we're going to be doing this at volume. Henry Ford had a huge role in the topic of automation. He effectively invented the moving production line, because before 1908 cars were simply built on one spot and workers moved around them. This was called the gypsy production system. However, Henry Ford made the car affordable by reducing waste using the moving production line that we know today. Now, the car itself was pulled through the shop using a rope, and each operator performed specialised tasks as the cars moved along. Producing cars this way allowed Ford to eliminate any unnecessary work or waste, and reduce the amount of inventory that was needed in the production process. These again are two principles that we will look at when we look at process automation, identifying how we can move from step to step to step in the process as quickly and as efficiently and with minimum waste as possible. As an interesting aside, Ford did struggle with the topic of variation in the process, which led to the very famous quote, "You can have any colour so long as it's black." And this was a problem at the time. Basically, he created the mass production process, building different variations in huge batches. It was these huge variations that can actually lead to fields full of cars when the market downturns, and actually led to their sort of significant financial problems down the line. Financial problems that Toyota did not face. They took a different approach. They did allow variation and allowed them to quickly adapt to different types of cars or colours that were needed throughout the manufacturing process. And this ability or flexibility is something that we'll also look at when we look at business processes. Now, keeping on the topic of automation and bringing it forward a bit, in the 1980s, screen scraping appeared. This was the practice of reading text, in bit by bit from a computer's display terminal screen. Some people mistake modern day automation with old screen scraping, and while sometimes it is still used and is still possible to do, the process of automation is far more complex, and we'll look at exactly how we achieve that later on. Automation continued, and in the 1990s end-user computing sort of evolved, and this provided end users with the ability to develop applications for themselves using tools such as spreadsheets. So end-user computing started the process of modern-day software automation. Moving forward to the 2000s, we now have the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence, and if you haven't taken a look at their site, it's worth Googling it and taking a look. Now, they've provided us with a fantastic definition for what is automation, modern day automation. And they say it's the application of technology allowing employees in a company to configure computer software or a robot to capture and interpret existing applications for processing a transaction, manipulating data, triggering responses, and communicating with other digital systems. While it's a rather dry definition, it does accurately explain that it's actually not a physical robot, something that we often run into when we're talking to stakeholders, and also that is something that you can sort of develop like a piece of software. However, we'll also see it works very differently from perhaps traditional software. Here are some examples of automation vendors. How many of them do you recognize? How many more could you name? And most importantly, what are the differences between these different vendors? We'll actually look in more detail at the different vendors in Chapter 5. But for now, the thing to remember is that these different providers provide different types of solutions, and actually aligning the right solution to your business problems is going to be one of the key lessons that you learn from Chapter 5. Here are some examples of organisations that have implemented automation. All of the information I've provided here is correct as of the end of 2017 and has all been available in the public domain, as all these companies have presented openly at different conferences. So, looking at the Bank of Ireland to begin with, they use a combination of two different automation solutions, one for the desktop, Win Automation, and one for RPA, Blue Prism. And again, this is something we're seeing more organizations do, that while initially you would tend to focus on a single automation solution, more and more actually are starting to adapt and use multiple automation solutions. And when we look in more detail later on at the different types of automation, you'll see why that might be something that would be useful for you too. But a little bit more about the Bank of Ireland implementation. So reading some statistics, they have 15 desktop bots and 100 RPA bots. They currently have 35 developers for a company of 11,000 employees and typically see a 4-to-1 ratio when it comes to benefit. Also, what's interesting about the Bank of Ireland is that they felt that their lean capability was initially weak and learned that this was something they had to develop more of in order to grow and scale and sustain their automation program. Something, again, that we also agree with in terms of putting this course together. UBS is the next one on our list. Now, UBS had an existing BPM, Business Process Management platform. So their processes were very well documented. And this is an interesting starting point because organizations that do have BPM tend to have a good culture of lean or another methodology that helps them to build processes that are very efficient and waste free. A very good starting point when you're starting to look at automation. If you don't have that, then effectively it's something you need to put in place. So their initial project involved 6 weeks development to create a simple robot, and they found that they were able to reduce the number of FTE on a process from 7 down to 2.4 at a cost of £35,000 for their initial project. However, their view is the robot may not be the long solution. However, they did say that it was low investment, it had a very positive impact on people, culture and their agility, and added a new layer of analytics that were previously unavailable. However, there were some other sort of findings, and that was that people are not used to continuous change and were typically waiting for the next big release. And automation provides a facility to give you change very rapidly and very quickly. So part of the cultural change was part of that. They also implemented a federated or decentralized model, something we'll look at when we look at how you scale automation later on. ING is a slightly different story. Now, they have aligned very closely with a tool called Automation Anywhere, and they started their journey 8 years ago. And they use robots not only for day-to-day projects, but also for legacy migration programs. They also implemented what we refer to as the hybrid Centre of Excellence. Again, something we'll look at in more detail later on. And they use that Centre of Excellence to develop not only automation, but also modern AI or machine learning and chatbots as part of their implementation strategy. They actually use 3 models when they're doing their development: a local model, a central model, and also a partner model in terms of the types of implementation they do, and they select based on the business needs. W&W are the top 15 German insurer, and again they're an organization that uses Automation Anywhere. Their big message at conferences has always been choosing the right technology partner makes the big difference. And we'd agree with this. Aligning the right technology to your business needs is really important. They also experienced a common problem, that the modeling approach the typical automation tools use was not initially liked by IT. And so initial work was really all driven from the business side. Although this is changing more as IT has become more familiar with automation, it is still a problem that we sort of run into from time to time. And actually a hybrid approach, i.e. a combination of both business and IT skills, is definitely still something we would recommend. W&W also measure the impact of their RPA program based on customer impact, something we'll look at when we sort of think about lean more closely. The first principle of lean is understanding customer value and hence the impact. Now their project ran rapidly, so they quote, their start process was 1 to 3 months. They scaled in months 4 to 9, and they've transformed in months 10 to 24. So compared to many organizations, they went through the 3 phases of maturity very, very quickly. Fidelity is next on our list. Fidelity use Blue Prism, and they're 5 years into their robotic process automation journey, and they combine both Lean and BPM and RPA. In numbers, they have 60 robots, 25 processes and 10 staff automated, and 90% of the staff comes directly from the business. This is something that is an ongoing debate as to whether or not you need technology skills versus business skills when developing RPA. And this is where using different technologies gives different answers, because some technologies are very, very aligned to simple business use, and some of the technologies have a very programming type background in terms of the format and structure they use. So again, aligning the types of business that you have, the types of people that you have, and the types of skills you have within your organization can help you to select the right vendor for your particular problem. Finally, we have ANZ and Wells Fargo, both organisations that have adopted robotic process automation, and both organisations find it as a digital transformation program. Again, something that we've also discovered when talking to many other organisations is how this aligns to your digital transformation and organisational transformation. While initially running a pilot very simply to understand which is the right tool for you and understanding how it can help you is really important. In the long term, the strategy can be quite transformational. And that's particularly true in financial services. Other financial services organisations that have significantly adopted RPA are companies such as Danske Bank, HSBC, Direct Line, American Express, BNP, Chubb Insurance, Royal Bank of Canada, Aon, RSA, Close Brothers, Admiral, ABN AMRO, Rabobank, Western Union and Royal Bank of Scotland, all big names that have actually sort of significantly invested now in automation. So moving on to a topic close to my heart, which is Lean, something I've been doing now since the late 90s. And the first thing to understand about Lean is it's all about waste elimination. And the word muda, although here more for fun, is the Japanese word for waste. And the founder of Lean thinking, a chap called Taiichi Ohno, gave this quote back when he wrote a book about what he'd done in 1978. And he said, all we are doing is looking at the timeline from the moment the customer gives us an order to the point when we collect the cash, and we're reducing that timeline by removing all the non-value added wastes. But how do we define what is value add? And the answer is we look at it from the customer's perspective and almost imagine, as a customer, are you willing to pay for this process? And if you're not, you should significantly challenge it. And this is really important when we talk about RPA too. One of the things we do not want to do is develop very, very complex processes because they are difficult to maintain and they may be doing steps that are simply unnecessary. We want to write RPA applications that are as efficient and as simple and well documented and well understood as possible. Now, from a Lean perspective, there is a flip side to this statement that we also find in organizations, which is organizations which look at their processes and they eliminate steps without really thinking about the customer impact. And this is how you end up with dissatisfied customers and rework down the line. So one of the most important elements is, again, focusing on what is value to the customer and how do you deliver that value. So what is Lean? Well, Lean production is a manufacturing methodology originally developed by Toyota in the 1950s for the manufacture of cars. The engineer Taiichi Ohno, who we've mentioned earlier, is credited with developing the Toyota production system, later known as lean thinking. And he discovered that through enhancing quality, now remember, we talked a lot about quality built in earlier. Through enhancing quality, production automatically improved and the waste of materials and resources was reduced. This is all together known as the lean enterprise. There are two other gentlemen who are also credited with a lot of the foundations of lean thinking. The first is W. Edwards Deming, who brought statistical process control to Japan, and we'll see how that actually forms part of Six Sigma and Lean Six Sigma later on. And the second is Seigo Shingo, a quality consultant hired by Toyota and went on to actually train many other organizations in many of the principles that they refined and perfected while at Toyota. Today, there are many global companies who have adopted lean principles. The use of the term lean in business or in manufacturing describes a philosophy that incorporates a collection of tools and techniques into business processes to optimize time, resources, assets, productivity, all the while improving the quality level of the products or services to customers. Lean production is all about managing and improving a workshop or business process so that you can deliver what the customer needs profitably. The phenomenon of lean production principles are they work anywhere in any type of business. They are universal. Lean principles have proven not only to be successful at improving results, one of the major building blocks of the Toyota production system is continuous improvement. It is through the implementation of continuous improvement processes that you can continue to sort of develop and optimize as new technologies and new methodologies and new ways of thinking and new customer demands continue to change. So to deliver lean production, what are the principles that you need to focus on? And many of these we've touched on in some way, shape or form already, as we've talked through the history. First of all, eliminating anything unnecessary, any unnecessary waste. And again, define that waste, challenge every step in your process. Second is minimize excess inventory. Now this applies both to physical processes and digital processes. So in a physical process, you don't want to have too many cars in your production line. You just want the right number. The same though is true of documents within your process. So for example, if you're talking about policies or any other type of electronic process, then actually you want to minimize the number that you've got work in progress at any one time, because the more that you have in progress, the more likely it is that something's going to sort of happen that's going to trigger extra work. You want to move through the process step by step as swiftly and as smoothly as possible. You want to prioritize production from customer orders. Now, this is the opposite of mass production and batching. So in many respects, there are many processes we see today where the old mass production techniques are still applied, where a certain number of items need to be batched up and then are handled all in one go. This is either something like month end, quarter end, year end, or even sort of waiting for a specific number before they're processed. And one of the key principles of flow is to try and actually process everything at demand. Now this can be really challenging when people are involved, but when you add automation and RPA, then being able to do straight through processing becomes a simpler option and something that you can now put in place that was perhaps a challenge in the physical world. Number 4 then is to meet customer requirements. Understand what is value to your customer and provide that to the customer in the most efficient way. Number 5 then we've talked about before as well, which is always do it right first time. That's the quality built in. And doubly important when we start talking about RPA. Number 6 is being empowerment, and this is a key component. It's the heart of the Toyota production system, is people, the ability to continually improve. And whether you're talking about automation or manual processes, there is going to be a need to continually improve and continually adapt and change to changing customer demands. So it's still going to be something, even in a center of excellence, that's going to be really important to you. The ability to design for rapid change. So as the environment changes around you, can you be flexible? And this is one of the things that Lean will definitely add to your RPA program that differs than if you simply take existing processes as they are and then automate them, because you will often automate unnecessary steps. So being able to challenge out any unnecessary steps prior to doing the automation is important. Number 8, interesting from a Toyota perspective, is they worked very, very closely with their suppliers and partners. And something, again, as RPA is a pretty new technology, I think partnering with suppliers is really important for your organization, but finding the right type of partner who can help you through the steps that you particularly need. And then finally, creating a system of continuous improvement, also called Kaizen, and we'll talk about Kaizen in a bit more later on. But actually, it is that continuous learning and continuous improvement that has changed Lean over the last 50 plus years to something that is still a relevant and modern approach. So covered a lot on that slide, so I'm going to take a breath, give you a second to sort of take some of that in, and then we'll move on. So here's the timeline for Lean and Six Sigma. Now, as we mentioned before, the principles of Lean and Six Sigma originated probably back in automatic looms and Henry Ford. But actually, it was during the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s that Taiichi Ohno really refined that thinking and actually got it down on paper in terms of how it should work. But his work largely went unnoticed until the oil crisis in 1973. In 1973, other organisations had been able to control their costs in periods of high demand because the mass production system simply worked. However, it proved to be the only methodology that worked in periods of low demand, and Toyota weathered that storm and other storms since because of that ability for the Toyota production system, or lean thinking, to adapt to different environments. In 1978, Taiichi Ohno decided to write a book about the Toyota production system. But unfortunately, it still went unnoticed largely around the rest of the world, although one of the organisations, the Shingujitsu organisation, did continue to promote it to other organisations on a worldwide basis. And it was really 1990 when Dan Jones and Jim Womack, two significant industry analysts in the car industry, looked at different methodologies and actually sort of quoted the term lean production for the methodology that Toyota had applied. This methodology, they said, wouldn't apply just to manufacturing, but could also apply to many other industries. And that led them to developing a follow-up book in '96, which actually started to look at how you could apply lean thinking to many different organizations, not just car manufacture. And that's pretty much what opened the door to the modern day lean thinking. Moving forward to quite recently, a chap called Eric Rice has continued to sort of develop the methodology of lean and understand how it can apply to innovation and the startup in the book, The Lean Startup. So lean is a methodology, a business methodology that's continued to learn and evolve through time. Now, in parallel to this, we also had Six Sigma, which started life in Motorola in the 1980s, but really sort of grew to prominence through the sort of involvement in the work in GE from 1995 onwards, when Jack Welch really made it part of the central culture to the entire organization, giving the whole organization a very statistical and data-driven view of the world. Today, Lean and Six Sigma work in parallel, providing people with different tools and techniques to be able to deliver waste-free, efficient business processes. So taking a breath. Lean then is a principle-driven, tool-based philosophy that focuses on eliminating waste so that all the activities add value from a customer's perspectives. In other words, it's the tools to get you there, but it's the principles that will keep you striving for continuous improvement. So if you wondered what Taiichi Ohno and all his mates were up to during the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s, then this is what they were working on. Effectively the Toyota House, a representation of the key principles that apply to the Toyota production system and subsequently adopted by lean thinking. So in this model, you have foundations at the bottom called Heijunka, you have two pillars there, just in time and Jidoka, and you have a roof. So starting at the top on the roof, you have the vision or the goal. And that goal was to be customer focused. Remember, understanding value at every step of the process from a customer perspective. To be people centered. We'll come back to that one, but that's all about empowerment and the ability to continually improve. To deliver products or services to the highest quality, the lowest cost and in the shortest time. Principles that apply not just to the car industry, but to any business process. Meanwhile, in the foundations, you have stability or standard work. Processes documented to be the most efficient they can currently achieve and making sure everybody is following that process to that specification. And it's not saying that things can't change in the future, they certainly can, but the Toyota principles believe that continuous improvement is built upon solid foundations. So each change is built on the solid foundations of the previous stability standard work. Next you have leveling, and leveling is about making sure a process runs from step to step as smoothly as possible with minimum delays. Sequencing then is the order in which processes are completed. And again, this is something that becomes very interesting when we talk about RPA, because the process sequence for a person may be different if done by a machine, because you no longer have physical constraints in terms of how that process operates that you do when you're talking about people. So those are the foundations. And then thinking about the pillars. So the first of the pillars, actually, funny enough, was well known in the Western world even before Toyota and lean thinking became more well known, and that was the concept of just in time. Just in time is the idea of having exactly what you need at the point that you need it at every step of the process. So your process is designed around that. In the physical world, that means having physical inventory. In the digital world, though, that probably means having the right information at the right time. So again, just in time works really well depending on whatever the business process. And then at the other side, Jidoka is just another word for quality built in. Again, something we've talked about before. Getting it right first time, every time, but stopping at an anomaly and being able to correct it before it proceeds. The idea of a defect moving from one step of the process to another is completely alien in lean thinking. And at the heart of all of this is what's called respect for people. It's empowerment, but it's more than empowerment. It's the ability to literally stop a production line if something is spotted to be wrong and then correct it. It is that true empowerment, the ability for people to take that ownership and accountability, whatever the process. And Kaizen, which is another word for continuous improvement, which we will also look at in more detail, is something that's at the heart of that. So this is the Toyota principles almost sort of represented in a house form, and is very well known representation of lean thinking. Lean thinking isn't just about the process and the doing, it's also about the strategy, and is often counter to traditional thinking. Traditional thinking often separates strategy from execution. However, lean thinking focuses on the front line, seeing the gemba, how it's working today, and being able to understand what you can then do to improve. So it becomes management's responsibility to support the bottom-up changes that are being made. It's also about finding the right measurement system. What gets measured gets done. It's an old quote, but it works really well. The Toyota House is also a continuous learning system, which deepens individual organisational and technical capability, and in a very collaborative way. The reason Lean has survived has been because it's continued to adapt and change to the world around us. It provides the capabilities to individuals to be able to solve problems. It provides the tools and techniques needed for finding the right solutions to the problems. And it's about ways of working. It's about collaboration. It's about being able to sort of put the right skills together and given time to find the right solutions and to find tomorrow's solutions, not simply find a best practice and move on. If there is a challenge to all of this, it's about thinking. It's about changing people's thinking that they perhaps learned from school and from other places that are less open-minded to trying new things, to trying new technologies like RPA, to being able to sort of drive change in that way. Now, Six Sigma is a huge topic, and I'm going to cover an itsy bitsy little bit of it here. But it's a very, very complementary to a lot of the lean thinking. And hence, nowadays, you tend to not see them treated separately. You hear people refer to Lean Six Sigma, and quite rightly so. Now, the goal of Six Sigma typically is about reducing variation in the process, but it provides us a lot of insight through the use of data. And using that data, we can understand what are the causes of that variation and what we need to be able to do and what we need to change to be able to correct that. But also measuring the results of a change to make sure that we've achieved the desired results. Six Sigma projects also run better as a project rather than an ongoing continuous piece of work. So you can use a lot of the Six Sigma tools as a fine-tuned way to actually look at specific problems. The methodology DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control, is something we'll actually look at in a bit more detail when we look at methodologies. Lean is a global phenomenon, and there are literally thousands and thousands of organisations which have adopted the approach. So we have here just a small flavour of the different types of organisations, but it's there to demonstrate the different types of industries that have continued to grow and adapt to lean thinking. And it started with Toyota and started with car manufacturing and moved into other manufacturing organisations such as Boeing or GE, but continued to develop through back office processes, transaction processes, and even through into the service industry with Starbucks and Tesco. And many of these are used in case studies within the book. So if you're interested in learning more, Lean Thinking, although it's quite an old book now, is a book that does cover a lot of how they adopted and adapted lean thinking to their organisation. Over the period of the next few chapters, we're going to look at a variety of different tools, and I've broken them down really into three different types. First of all, you've got your strategic tools in terms of setting direction. You've then got your very process tools when you're sort of looking at a particular project or problem. And then you've got your day-to-day operational tools, things that you can put into practice just as part of your day-to-day operations. So we'll see through chapters 2 through 5 that we'll actually focus more on the how do you set up for success and how do you get going. But chapters 6 and 7 will focus very, very specifically on processes and how you can apply the RPA tools and the lean thinking to specific processes. And finally, chapters 9 and 10 is more about the operationalization as we start to look at the tools and the techniques that you can use to apply to improve your processes and make them ready for automation. Bringing this second chapter to a close, we're going to look now at the rise of the robots. What is going on in the current market? Well, the global robotic process automation market in all its flavours was estimated at $271 million in 2016 and is now expected to grow to $1.2 billion over the next 5 years. So there's no doubt RPA is here to stay. But that alone is only a small part of the picture. When you start to add in the growth of intelligent process automation, which combines RPA and machine learning, and the growth of artificial intelligence into general operations and general processes, the amount of spend is significant. And we will see later on the importance of RPA as the gateway into being able to provide a facility for some of these machine learning techniques. The changes brought about by automation is sometimes referred to as the fourth industrial revolution, and with good reason. Without doubt, the impact on society, on culture, and on work will be just as significant as we've seen in previous iterations. The types of work being undertaken will radically shift. Outsourcing disrupted. Outsourcing is already one of the most significantly disrupted industries, where there are many mundane and repetitive tasks and can easily be transferred to a bot. Some outsourcers have been quick to spot this and have started to change and have been adapting to RPA. Others have not. But overall, the economics of outsourcing to a bot workforce remains questions as to whether this is sustainable and whether it's cheaper to now bring those bots in-house. Resource shortages. Larger organisations with support from the Big Four have already started to align their technology choice, but are equally draining skilled resources from the market and leaving a shortage of air for smaller businesses and suppliers. The increasing number of robotic process automation technologies is diluting the pool further. This is starting to be addressed this year as we see a growth in the number of training courses available to help alleviate the technical skills needed to implement RPA. Challenges to getting started. It's far from a done deal. There are still many organisations that have yet to start on their RPA journey. They're fearful of the people impact or bewildered by the growing number of different choices available, and potentially often hampered by IT organisations who don't see it as a strategic solution. If you haven't started on your RPA journey yet, it's worth starting small and beginning your pilot soon, and we'll see quickly in the next few chapters how you can do that. Problems to scaling up. While there are amazing results achieved by companies that have successfully delivered automation, there are those that have successfully delivered pilots but then struggle to scale. This tends to be a problem of operating model and organisation design, and something that needs to be addressed. Some of the lean principles we're going to cover will help with this. The future and new operating models. New operating models will be critical for business survival, and automation will be an enabler for these models. People will be displaced, but new jobs and skills will also be created. As automation increasingly includes elements of learning and intelligence, it will be essential for regulated industries to demonstrate their compliance, likely expanding skills such as data science. Vendor survival. Not all vendors will survive. Some will be consumed by other organisations. Others will just not hold on to significant market share. Equally, not all solutions are alike, and niche players will continue to have their place. The more disruptive vendors are already making it clear how to differentiate from the others, while smaller operators are seeking partnerships to expand their reach more rapidly. Hybrid skills. Skills continue to be a premium across the whole industry, but alongside the new operating models, hybrid skills of business and technology will be highly sought. Similar to low-code and model-driven technologies, automation skills will increasingly be found in technology-savvy business people and business-savvy technology people. Cultural change. The hardest part of this jigsaw will be the cultural changes. Whether at work or at home, the automation will bring many changes. We will each traverse our own personal change curve over the coming years and will find a new place, but the journey will certainly be fun. So Chapter 2 has covered the first of our goals, understanding the history of both lean and automation and what you needed to know about the journey so far. Thank you for listening to Chapter 2. I hope it's been useful. As always, please provide feedback at the RPA Academy forums. Chapter 3 will start to look at the different frameworks, starting with the different types of automation at your disposal and then the different methodologies that can help with your implementation. Thank you.